I am so excited to be here with Kara Swisher, the journalist, podcast host, and oracle of the tech world, and micromobility's industry's own Horace Dediu, to talk about our car-free tomorrow. First, let me say, Kara, that I am so delighted to be speaking with you today. I read your work, I listen to Scott's and yours predictions, and I am always, always, always here for your latest take on Elon Musk, whether it's through your podcast or on Twitter itself.
Great.
Kara, I know you've emerged for many in this space, in this transportation space, in this micromobility space, as a hero when in 2019 you wrote that New York Times op-ed on how owning a car would soon be as quaint as owning a house.
Yeah. Horse. You can still own your house.
I don't own my house, but you know.
I do. I own more for the rest of us. I own enough.
Thank you for on behalf of all of us houseless people. Yeah. So I want to start there. Why did you write the article? You know, when you were in 2019, who are you trying to convince?
Well, I'm trying to get to the idea of what's coming. You know, the idea of that people will probably there'd be cars on demand. I didn't say there wouldn't be cars. It drove a lot of people crazy. It said a carless future. That is not to happen. That is not going to happen. It's how the cars are going to be, what transportation is going to be like. And so I was talking about the idea of beyond Uber, essentially. Where do you need a car? And especially among young people. I spent a lot of time talking to my kids. They took a while to get their licenses. They're very used to mobility in different ways, whether it's scooters or bikes on demand, the way you see those now. Many people don't own bikes anymore. They just get them on demand if they live in cities. People in rural areas got angry at me. We need our trucks. I'm like, fine, keep your trucks. That's a very different thing. But for the most people, they would either not rent the car, but have it on demand in some way that everything else has become. And so I was trying to get to that idea. Now, in the interim between that, I had 2 more children and I did need a car.
I was going to ask about that. Yeah. Are you still car liberated?
Well, no, I'm not. But I own electric cars. You know what I mean? Which is interesting. Okay. And so when I went out when we had I have 4 kids, but the 2 last ones, we did need a car to get around to do stuff. And so, there was no options to rent them all the time. And they were or to have them, you know, on demand that they have in Washington, DC, where I live. And so what I did is I bought a Kia hybrid, which I needed the seats because of so many children. 2 of them were rather large. And so, I was like, this is, I'm still going to try to go electric or get on demand. And so we ended up, I now have have the Kia hybrid, which actually just got clipped by a Tesla today in DC.
Autonomous or what? Yeah.
No, it was a regular Tesla and they drove it right into my car and then kept going. And then they kept going. Hit and run. I'm going to get them. Don't worry. I have their license number. So, which was ironic in a lot of ways. And then I bought a Chevy Bolt, which is an electric car, because one of the things that has happened is there's a lot of competitors to Tesla now. Now Tesla's still far ahead, but in terms of manufacturing and technology, battery technology, but it's not that far ahead. And there's lots of options now, especially in the lower ranks. I have a Chevy Bolt's not a very expensive car. And so it's an interesting time, is that I would love there to be more on-demand services. And I think eventually like a Chevy will be an on-demand service or something like that, especially around the power. I had a charger installed in my house. It was very expensive.
Is it? Yeah.
And you shouldn't. There should be and the public ones are great. Charging. It's great, but there's juice hogs.
When they're there.
When they're there. When they're not, the car is not occupying it. I'm in a constant war with a BMW, a hybrid, and not a hybrid, electric car. And he's always in this space. It's the same guy. And I'm like,
your nemesis, your arch nemesis.
Yeah. I write him notes, juice hog. I said, hey, juice hog, once again, you're here today. So there's that. And that has to sort itself out, and speed of that and getting them around and through the infrastructure bill. Like that, they've got to be as ubiquitous as gas stations. I'm not particularly concerned with running out of juice because, unless you're going on long trips, then you have to plan it. But ubiquity is the one thing of charging and quickness, obviously. So it's moving forward in the way I think. I just think there's going to be a wholly different transportation system within the next 10 years, especially for young people who aren't interested in buying vehicles.
Right. And I would count myself among those people. And Kara, in the article, you talked about
Hmm.
how massive private car ownership was going to go away.
Hmm.
You yourself had just mentioned as your family has grown, as
Yeah.
your family has
But not my
doubled,
sons. My sons don't
but
want to buy cars. They don't. And I don't see them
yeah.
buying cars. I don't see them. I think if they can find, my son goes to NYU now. He doesn't use a car an old car that we had, a Mini. And he likes he loves his Mini, but he takes bikes everywhere. He doesn't even take cars in New York. He takes bikes,
Yeah.
he takes scooters, a lot of bikes and things like that. But he just has a mentality, the way young people have a mentality toward consuming entertainment. It's the same thing, is that he doesn't watch linear television. He consumes it on demand, or he
Sure. In short
consumes it.
bites.
Yes, in
Yep.
short bites. No, he watches substantive things, but both of them don't use television the way I did. And that's the same thing that's going to happen with cars.
But do you see that as a cultural difference or a technological difference?
It's just the ease of use. It's frictionless.
Yeah.
As it becomes more, right now, I would use car sharing, but there's not enough of them yet. And it's not, the economics aren't there yet, but it's going to be as things, as things develop. The speed at which there's more choices to Tesla is astonished me. Everyone was focused on autonomous. I'm not particularly interested in autonomous over, electric. You know what I mean? When you that is when autonomous is a very difficult issue. But I do think fleets of car ownership that will come and get you, or you will use, seems inevitable, given every other part of our world has done a version of that.
Yeah. So, Kara, I'm hearing that you're revising your prediction a little bit around the end of massive car ownership. We're talking about
don't have children when you're close to 60. But yeah, but I think for a vast majority of people, car ownership is just not going to be the thing you do. And especially with young people, there's statistics all over the place about driver's license. There's just a story in the Washington Post, driver's license down. And it's not just city bound people. It's because they avail themselves to these things and they're just in the early stages.
Yeah. And I know Horace is one of those folks who are both creating those statistics, but also creating estimates and forecasts about how massive car ownership is going to change. So Horace, I'm going to invite you to join this part of the conversation and just share a little bit about the data, the projections, the analysis that you're doing and seeing around whether or not we're really at the beginning or the end of a trend.
Yeah, the good thing is that we do have a very good handle on the data because, registrations are available. They're public. They're global. Every country reports this, and also same with driving licenses. So actually, you can go Google this stuff and dig it up. The problem is that we don't get a data about sort of intentions, or as Kara put it, the next generation's zeitgeist. Here's the raw numbers, though. For the United States, we did see a plateau in total number of cars in use. It went from 276.5 to 275.9 during 2020-21. So hopefully that's the beginning of a trend. Unfortunately, that number is quadruple what it was in 1975 and 1960, double since 1975. So we've been on this very long trajectory of rising car ownership in the United States, or the number of vehicles in use. However, again, there's hope, and this is the problem with the data. Is if you go back in history, it looks like it's going in one direction, but when you interview people and we talk to people, it seems like there's a crack in the foundation. There's one country in the world where the per capita consumption of automobiles is going down, and it's Germany. The big problem globally is that a lot of emerging countries, a lot of emerging economies are actually seeing a huge growth in the number of vehicles. So I think the most saturated markets, obviously the most advanced markets, are starting to pull back. That's where we see a lot of footholds for micromobility, especially on demand, as Kara put it. But the real challenge will be the next billion people who are going to move into cities and want to have mobility. Will they take the route of the United States and China, or will they take the route of, let's say, Amsterdam or Netherlands in general, and Denmark? So it's where we're trying to shift the conversation, especially for non-consumers.
And Kara, what do you think?
Mhm.
Which route are they going to take?
I was just in Europe for a week last week, and I have to say the number of cars in use in cities, these congestion pricing and everything else is just the way it's going. I mean, and especially with the focus on climate. Now, I'm leaving electric cars out of this, although electric cars
I was
do
going to
produce.
ask, yeah.
I would say that they, you see, I think the statistics I was seeing was I was looking at I've been visiting all the electric car companies, Lucid and what BMW and others are doing, and Mercedes, and all of them are seeing upticks in those sales. And I think the down thing is in gas cars. And then there's government moving in to say no gas powered cars, like whether it's, that is going to make a big deal. And I think car makers are moving that way because people are excited about these products. Like, why would you continue to sell? And whether it's trucks or whatever, they will struggle, each of them, because of the cost of getting it into there. But again, inevitability that electric cars will be the way people are going to drive. And so then the question is, will they be so excited that everyone wants to own an electric car, or will there be another way to? I'm excited about owning my electric car. I feel great. To move off the grid. And as soon as I can get a Kia, like you can't get them. I was lucky to get one.
I know. It's like a
year. Yeah, it does. And so, I would love to get the full electric Kia car now and go full electric, because like, why not? And so I think I'm actually typical of a consumer who's excited about it. Now, again, if there were the on-demand services enough, I would certainly use them completely. You see lots of rental fleets moving over to electric, for example, and you'll see Uber, they'll move over to electric. And so
there was the Hertz and Tesla deal, right?
Yeah. Although interestingly, we were in California for the holidays, and I saw it there, and I said, "Hey, you guys, do you want to drive?" My older sons, do you want to drive a Tesla? And they're like, "No, that jackass, we don't want to drive his car," which is fascinating because, well, it was interesting because the brand is being hurt because of that. And so then people are looking at alternatives, especially his base customer, which are all the woke people that he seems to insult all the time, along with advertisers. And so, but I actually, it's an interesting thing. If the excitement around electric cars is really picking up, and the choices are more and more, whether it's Kia is doing really well, especially Ford is doing well, GM, they still don't have the stack that Tesla have, but they're gonna, and the battery technology moving forward. And so it does make me wonder if people will want to just own one of these things, or if they will be willing to share them. But again, people have got Uber and Lyft and the other services around the world have gotten people used to this, very used to the idea. Now the question is, will they be used to driving themselves in these group fleets that come along, or this has been the biggest use case. And then the second thing I think that we have to really pay attention to is what happened during the pandemic of people not moving as much, right? Not having as many needs to bring themselves into cities. And that's interesting to me. And then whether this infrastructure bill will help with public transportation. That will be, there's no high-speed trains in the United States. It's astonishing, but Europe is full of them. And this just not just getting from cars, but from planes, like these short hop things that are going to be declared illegal in Europe. So people use trains. That's really interesting. So the government has been and will be playing a big role in this kind of stuff, whether it's due to climate or political or the ability of moving people around easier and in a more efficient and climate friendly way.
Yeah, and Kara, you brought up so many interesting themes there, and we're going to get to all of them. We're going to talk about public transit, we're going to talk about cities, we're going to talk about regulation. But I want to fix on one thing that you said, which is that there are so many vehicle models and makes out there. I mean, in the electric vehicle space, there's 200 plus types of vehicles that have been announced. In the micromobility landscape, we have more than 1,500 companies that we have been able to articulate and see out in the market there. In general, we're just seeing this titanic demand for e-bikes, for neighborhood electric vehicles, for mopeds, other small electric vehicles in the US, across the world. But we haven't really seen a clear market leader. And I'm wondering from your perspective, whether it's in the electric
cars, it's Tesla.
You think it's still Tesla?
It is still Tesla.
I disagree.
Yeah.
I disagree.
No, but the numbers are, I go over these numbers every week. The numbers, I don't think it's going to remain
United States. For the United States only, BYD has already overtaken them globally.
Yeah, in China. I'm sorry, I'll leave out China.
Well, even globally, and I think this year we're going to see battery electric from BYD be number one.
Yeah,
It's been a few hybrids mixed in there. I mean, I'm not here to quibble with Elon, but the fact is that all the automakers are incentivized. In fact, they're
100%.
prevented from making anything else, or will be very soon, and they know those deadlines, and they've been just scaling production, and it's all a grab right now, trying to get resources to make as many electric cars as probably demand will be. So and the brand issues coming up, as you pointed out. But yeah, I think well, Julie's question was more about, will we see something like that in the bikes or micromobility space, where it's still a free-for-all, 1,500 players. It's a lot of small companies right now, and we don't see an emerging brand. And that's really the puzzle right now, I think.
Well, it's Uber, right? I think probably in the United States, depends on whatever the dominant rental, on demand service it tends to be here, or say city bikes, for example, with bikes, whoever's backing those. I think Uber is that here in DC where I am. What's interesting about the Tesla thing, the only thing I would say is, having visited all these car makers, I've talked to them all, and they're very honest that Tesla's way ahead of them in terms of manufacturing capabilities. People want them, they just can't make them. If you can't get a car, that's a failure of the market, it's a failure of the company. But one of the things that he did, which was a smart thing, is he has the stack, and so he can make these cars faster. And though people don't want them as much, look, China demand is off, and there's demand, so he's got the manufacturing capability that he built out. He's building that battery factory, whatever comes of it, and he owns his stuff. I think one of the weaknesses of most of these car makers is they deal with vendors all the time, right? That they don't have the stack. And so that's going to be their weakness. It'll be their strength eventually when everyone's got them, because it's less costly to do it that way. But right now, getting the pieces to put them together is I was talking to someone at GM, and they're like, we're selling 2024 now. We can't sell. We've sold all the ones we can sell. And so obviously there's consumer demand. It's just not supply. And then if your only option is a Tesla and you think the guy's a jerk, you don't want to buy it, then you'll hold it off. But there is consumer demand. And that's all I'm saying is that, and the bike thing, it'll be whatever service you happen to like. I think the bikes themselves will be commodities, presumably.
Interesting. Horace, what do you think?
Well, the thing is, it's going to depend a lot on whatever novelties come up or innovations come up, because I think one of the things you mentioned was the stack, but there's no such thing yet for small vehicles, but there could be. I mean, these things will come with batteries. They'll come with onboard communications. They're coming with computation as well. And so our thesis has been that, this is the iPhone of mobility, in the sense that, you have the PC, which is a car, and then you have this micro vehicle, which is your portable, on-demand vehicle potentially. And so we're advocates of sort of coming in with software eventually as the sort of the catalyst to a new business model. And so that's what we're kind of anticipating a little bit. But my hope, my dream is to see what happened to the phone industry and computing to come here as well. Yeah.
I think you're right. Apple is the biggest player going to be here. They're working on software. I don't think they'll make a car. Everyone wishes they would. I'm sure it would be beautiful, but they will be. I think software is where they attack this problem head on, and that's what they're good at. And eventually, they'll make a product that is, that is like looks like an Apple experience. But you've got Johnny Ive designing a Porsche, the electric Porsche. I think that's what he's up to, and he created the iPhone and the experience on the iPhone. And so you're going to see people, either Apple or Apple adjacent people, doing that part, because right now the experience in the cars, I have to say, a Bolt, which wasn't very expensive, is a very nice experience. I've been inside the Mercedes. The Lucid is beautiful, and one of the problems, and the Mercedes is beautiful. The beautiful displays on the entire front of the car dashboard is gorgeous. I can't stand the Tesla with its glued on computer, it's like it's giant iPad glued onto the air conditioning. So, and once you experience the other one, you're like, why do I have a glued on thing? So that's the one thing that I think is advantages a lot of companies, which is design and comfort. Because one of the things someone pretty high up said to me is, why do you, he had characterized a Tesla as the inside of an egg. And for that much money, for it to be not luxurious and have problems with, you can go on all these Tesla boards on Reddit and things that break on the end. It should be perfect. It should be a perfect experience. And so I think people, especially at the high end, when you look at a Lucid, it's gorgeous. It's just a gorgeous car. Even if it had a gas tank, you'd be like, this is a gorgeous car. And so, and same Mercedes are just stupendous looking, and because they have experience in design and beauty inside. And so one of these persons told me is, why does it feel like any of these cars, just because they have a different engine, have to look like a computer? And that's I think what's been left out is the beauty of these things will increase, and therefore it's, that's great for marketing for people who want different things, or it could be a much less expensive experience. But I have to tell you, the inside of my Bolt is beautiful. It's well done. It's really well done for the price. And so you feel good about owning that. And so I think design has been left out of this and what it looks like. And once autonomy comes in, the whole windshield, of course, will be a screen someday, not today. But what they're doing now is very creative, some of the stuff I've been seeing. And it's great because then consumers have choices.
Yeah. And Horace, we've talked about at a number of conferences or more recent micromobility conferences that we don't yet have that iPhone of micromobility. We don't have that seamless sort of beautiful experience that Kara is mentioning in terms of the electric vehicles. Is that a correct statement, or am I talking out of both sides of my mouth?
Well, no, we do see some beautiful new products that are actually created by designers, the Johnny Ive types that came out of automotive. I've met executives from Audi, in Britain, the premier Formula One companies are dabbling in micromobility. Yeah, but it's
and
just
going electric. You're right. Yeah.
And I've been to bike shows where the names were Pininfarina, Maserati, Bugatti, every automaker, obviously, but they wouldn't, they wouldn't hesitate putting their names on scooters and on beautiful e-bikes that they want to sell next to their premium products. So it's very much in Europe, especially, the low end mobility is sex appeal right now. It's all about Italian flair. The Fiat 500, for example, is the sexiest car in the world, and yet it's a small car. So I think there's this shift happening where, although America isn't quite on board yet, of blending the high end automotive with the high end micromobility, and kind of making one rub on the other, because the high-end automobility world needs help with greenwashing. It needs help to present itself globally as something of the future, and that the high-end micromobility needs to create for itself a brand. So there's all of this interesting cross-pollination happening. So just give it a little time. It hasn't quite bubbled up.
I think you may be discounting how much young people use these things. I mean, you see them in use. They're not people are very accepting. And again, it's the biggest experiment going on of people using these things. That's all I have to do. Once you use it and see an efficacy, you start to use it again. And then it gets better. The experience gets better and better. Now, scooters still are a little bit glitchy in signing up and getting into them and this and that. But bikes now are really easy to use. They're simple. You just click, and the combination of the phone with the device and the phone with my car is amazing. It's not just a stunt. So a lot of things used to be sort of, a stunt that you could do, but I actually use my phone quite a bit with my car, just the way I remember the beginnings of Apple Pay. It was so glitchy and terrible. And now it's effortless. It's seamless. And the more you move towards frictionless in these kind of encounters, and it incorporates with your phone, or eventually you say you have glasses or whatever, Apple will have these AR glasses. It'll really be an interesting combination. I think the seamless working of it together has improved drastically. Like even walking in your phone, linking to the music system very quickly has improved drastically.
Absolutely. Just an example, the Citroen Ami, which is a new up and coming kind of really micro car, which we consider micromobility. There is no display on the dash. It's your iPhone or your smartphone that's going to be that. And so people are already saying, I used to say this half jokingly, that the car became a great accessory for the phone, because you were trying to figure out how to plug it in all the time, and it's like, where am I going to mount it?
So
where
ridiculous.
am I going to connect it? And all these automakers were resisting. They were trying to make it harder. And now it's become so that it should be wireless and should be seamless and automatic. And I think once that happens and people think of their mobility experience as partly mobile phone, then we're going to see more and more micro being folded into that as well.
100%.
So it's an amazing. I think we're Kara and I have been around for so many decades in tech that it's like we get a sense of deja vu. At least I do. That's sort of like I'm seeing things happening again and again. So the idea of devices, telephony, entertainment, these have been, like galaxies merging with the compute galaxy, which kind of has grown as a result. And so we've gotten the question always is like, who is winning, or who is, there was always an adversarial logic, right? Hollywood versus Silicon Valley, but it's like, well, we've figured out a way to work together and make solutions that make sense for everybody. And I think transportation in a weird way has kind of been a laggard, even though it's a natural place for computation. And they've gone about it in a very kind of embedded way. Arguably very poorly, but I think now it's starting to get better.
Yeah, they certainly get it. I mean, you certainly could. They don't have a resistance to it at all. I think they find it exciting because suddenly people want their car. You know what I mean? They don't have to.
And but they didn't want the OS thing though. They've been fighting against.
They have, but I think they get it now because you can joke about the idea, but the phone is the original mobile device, right? The car is the original mobile device. And so what can you do to do that? And I think people, again, are used to it in every other, whether they're using streaming, it's the same kind of relationship that you have, whether it's streaming, which used to be super difficult to sign in. It's still not great, but it's moving towards, controlling your home with Nest or whatever you happen to use, controlling your alarm system, controlling your money, it's all from this handheld dashboard that you have right here. And so I think it's inevitable and your car is that now too. And it's not, again, a lot of times you used to get stuff around cars, especially, and they were stunts. They really were stunts. It's just, and then you never used it again. It's what you use over and over again every day. Like I heated my car this morning before I got in at 6:30 to take, it was cold out today. It was rainy. I had it going and it was locked. And at the same, once we got in, it was ready to go. And so I would not, I didn't have to go outside at all. And it was easy. And so that's really ease of use, frictionlessness, and beauty are three things that have been sort of left out of this, which is the very beginning of computers. They were hard to use. They were ugly. That gray plastic.
Absolutely.
Thing. And then Steve Jobs showed up with
Isn't it?
It's the same
isn't
thing.
it amazing though that the
thing.
logic of Steve Jobs in the early days was like, why can't we bring consumer product thinking to a computer? Why can't we bring design, industrial design, and art and all these other things? And absolutely resonated, took off. By the way, the car people got this back in the 20s. They made, you look at the advertising, it very quickly shifted from, hey, it works, to, wow, look how beautiful it is. Look how free you're going to feel. Look how, it's going to improve your lifestyle in some way or other. But it's like evolution. And that's why it feels like deja vu.
Yeah.
We're coming up to this new era of multimodality where people are comfortable both with sharing and with owning and with micro and with existing infrastructures as well. I think we need to touch though on the question of government, because and I know, I'm sorry, Julie, I know you're probably itching to go there, but unlike the other industries, I'll say this, unlike the other industries where they kind of could go at it alone, they didn't have to get approvals, they didn't have to get subsidies or anything like that. Mobility is kind of dependent on infrastructure a lot more. And I think that's where we need a little bit more leadership from Washington.
Yeah. And I mean, it's an excellent point. And Horace, I definitely want to go there. I mean, when we talk about the legacy of the auto industry, we're talking about decades, almost 100 years, maybe 100 plus years of subsidies from the government, whether it's for the manufacturing itself or whether it's for our own vehicle ownership. And Kara, you were mentioning before the bipartisan infrastructure law, the Inflation Reduction Act. I mean, these are major infrastructure bills, once in a lifetime infrastructure bills that really push forward electric vehicles and electric vehicle ownership. I'm just, curious to get your thoughts around looking at the birth of big tech and big auto as precedents. What do you think we need to see in government for micromobility to succeed? Like what needs to happen? What does federal government need to do differently?
This last infrastructure bill, didn't get everything everybody wanted, but that always happens. But it certainly moved the ball forward rather significantly. I think Pete Buttigieg, which I interviewed at Code this year, is doing a significant amount to focus in on that idea. It's just putting this stuff in place that we need, whether it's juicing stations for electric cars, or new kinds of highways that eventually will deal with autonomy, whether it's investing in critical public transportation infrastructure. The governments around the world have got to just realize this is going to cost money, and it will help over time, especially with the climate crisis. And so, or California, everyone was shocked when California passed that law, or, and they've done it elsewhere around the globe even faster. It's not fast enough, right? And so initially it was like, no. And then it's like, oh, okay, yeah, that's what we'll do. And I think the lack of resistance from these car companies was telling. I mean, you've had some.
I know, they were like, yes, please, right?
You had some right-wing people saying, I'll have my gas stove, whatever, like have it. But, again, it's really interesting because, again, the people that actually have gas stoves are mostly the woke elite. But okay, fine, whatever, have your gas stove. It's so funny. It's like,
gotta get the burn
same thing. Guess who bought the Teslas? Guess who bought the and so it's going to be an interesting thing as people move towards, but I find people tend to resist initially and then they adapt perfectly as long as the consumer solution is better. And I think, one of the things tech does is they always try to, the consumers are the beta for everything. So they put out the shitty product and then move on to the better ones over time. That's kind of what's happening here. And then eventually they get to the really good stuff, whether it's, think of AirPods. What a great business that's been. I think everyone was like, these are ugly. Nobody wants them. And then they got better and better and better. And then you get the AirPod Maxes and they keep iterating and innovating. And that's where it goes. And I think but government has to be part of it, partner with them, because it's so critical. These are like two things: healthcare. Well, three things: climate change. Well, four things: finance, cyber currency, healthcare, and climate, which government are going to have to be deeply involved, and transportation they should be right out front. And I think they see, at least the Biden administration certainly is paying attention. They've had infrastructure week, it looks like, finally, and they really do. And I know he certainly does. And it's a great topic for him. He's obviously going to run for president. It's fast forward. It's fast leaning. Yeah. And so I think he's been very aggressive in this area. Only thing he and I argued about is they willfully antagonized Musk for no good reason, because he is a pioneer, right? I'm like, why do you look, this is pre his current jerky stage, but he was somewhat jerky before, but not this jerky. And I think they should have embraced everyone in terms of doing this and celebrating them. And so, especially as Horace rightly said, China's really making strides in this area. They have their own problems in China over all kinds of things, COVID and et cetera, but they certainly do understand how important this is. And they certainly could dominate if the different governments aren't, whether it's Germany with BMW and Mercedes, whether it's France, whether it's anything. Every country has got to not just have its national heroes, but also be investing heavily in this area, because it's good for commerce and everything else.
The U.S. has a great superpower, and that is software. When I talked in Washington it was early 2020, just before the COVID broke out, and I went and I talked to both sides, various staffers and so on, and I said, I was coached by somebody to say the right thing to the right people, and I said, there's something in it for everybody here. There's a benefit for entrepreneurial type of American innovation, because the companies are platforms now. So the companies that are really leading, whether it's in automobility or micromobility, are American, strangely, at least for now. But also as far as environmental concerns are at stake, so much is at stake, and yet again. We have solutions, rather the industry has solutions for that side of the aisle as well. So I think it's one of those win-wins that shouldn't be, electrification, decarbonization, micromobility. These aren't partisan issues. They're made so by various people for some reason. But it's been about really the tide that lifts all boats. It's like, how can you argue politically whether technology in general has been a benefit or not? I mean, there's some fringe groups who probably are reactionary about it, but I think this is generally a very positive thing. We just have to be able to help, advocacy here.
Yeah, and I want to get back to this point a little bit. I mean, so first of all, on the federal government, on what's happening at the national level in the U.S., Kara, I'd agree with you that I think the national government has done a lot to push forward on electric vehicles. They've done a lot through the past two pieces of legislation to push forward on climate action. I think they've done a lot less so for these smaller electric vehicles that Horace and I are talking about, for the bikes, the e-bikes, the e-mopeds, the e-motorbikes, the e-scooters, and just this Cambrian explosion of form factors that we see in the small electric vehicle space. But beyond that, beyond looking at national government incentives for those companies, you made some really important points about how some of the early tech leaders, I mean, their big advantage was they put the hardware and the software together. And I'm just wondering, from your perspective, you've seen so many of these tech leaders. What lessons should these smaller micromobility companies be learning from the supply chains, from the design, from everything else that these tech companies had done to integrate hardware and software and make that seamless experience?
Well, I mean, this is a bigger deal. This isn't creating a phone, which are relatively inexpensive. So that's the problem. I think just like with AI right now, the big companies are dominating. There's a lot of interesting smaller companies, but they're getting sucked up by these big companies. And it's very clear that Google and Facebook and Amazon and Apple and Microsoft are going to dominate AI.
You think so? Yeah.
Yes, they already do. They already do. But I mean, there's certainly room for it. I mean, you could talk about OpenAI, but guess who the investors are? Elon Musk and Microsoft. Sorry. Right. They don't seem like innovative young people to me. But nonetheless, this is going to cost a lot of money. And so you expect the big players, the entrenched players, to probably do well. There's a thing there's two kinds of innovation. One is, keeping, I forget the words for them, but it's innovation that's based on your product that you have and you keep innovating it forward. And then there's I think it's Clay Christensen. And then there's disruptive innovation. Sustaining innovation, which I think a lot of these people are doing, and disruptive innovation. Yeah. And it's very hard to be disruptive in this space, whether it's planes, whether it's, I just met with a company that's doing not electric planes, but what is it? What are they using?
Sustainable
hydrogen
aviation fuel or hydrogen?
Yes, no hydrogen. Okay. And I'm going to go up in one. I'm like, oh, do I really? Yeah. So they're out in California.
No way. Oh, that's awesome.
And so, but you're seeing it. So that's a small company. Yeah. I assume it's going to get bought by a bigger company, right? But they certainly have. What they're doing is making partnerships with United, and the other airlines are going to have to go this way. And they've got a couple hundred miles they can run these things, which is interesting. And then they've got to also have deals with the big makers, the Boeings, the Lockheeds, et cetera. And so that's how it's going to. I think it's going to be a lot more partnership in this area with sort of innovative companies on the edge of different things, and then it moving, but it's costly. It's really costly. So you cannot do this without partnership.
Oh, I would agree. I would agree on aviation, on automobility, on even other forms of transit and transport that are large. Generally, the phrase we use is the bigger it is, the slower it goes, actually, even though they tend to go fast, but they're slow in iteration because it is so costly. So what the excitement is at the very low end, at the bikes and scooters, and they're like, we're just seeing a huge number of new players, and everybody's waiting. When is Apple and Amazon and Google and or the automakers going to join this gold rush? And I think they're cautiously sort of like dancing around the problem, because I think they're not sure. First of all, they also don't want to get involved with something that could be dangerous, people getting hurt, although obviously people in cars get hurt all the time. But there's I think from our point of view, and I'm a big fan of Christensen. I studied and worked with him, but the idea is that major mobility, so like the mega mobility, is very much sustaining. And micromobility is very much disruptive. At least it could be.
It could be. I mean, I just think they're going to just buy them if they decide they want to get in this area and they want to make it suffer. Or there'll be a lot of different brands in the smaller areas, because they'll innovate on everything from velos and stuff like that, which is also there's going to be regulatory things out the yin yang for that, like people flying in drones above the cities. That's going to be one it's just going to be problematic. But you're going to get those, different versions of those. And so you're going to see smaller companies try it first, and then eventually, once that you see some success, some of the bigger ones picking them up. And so that'll be an interesting thing. You certainly when I saw this plane thing, I'm like, oh, he's going to get bought by, and then I could think of 20 different things, but why should they do it now? Let him do it. Right. And the same thing with a lot of, because they don't have the attention to do it. They don't have, it's just like Google didn't have the attention, nobody had the attention to do what TikTok was doing, right? And they should have, it should have been done by Facebook, or that should have been done by or Snapchat or any of the others, but they didn't, because they were focused on their core product and not on the next one. And so, it depends on where people pick to go, where they're picking. If you look in hindsight, Mark Zuckerberg should have focused on a TikTok-like experience rather than jumping all the way to the metaverse, which
and Google should have focused on social. They totally
well, they
missed
did.
on that.
They didn't. They tried.
Poorly.
You know why? That's because they're the least social people on the planet. And so if you know them, when they did it, I was like, no, you don't.
Yeah, it's not going to happen for you.
Zuckerberg wasn't particularly
no, but
either.
He understood that particular thing. I just was like, no way is Google Plus going to be in. I called it Google Minus when it was started. And that's where it went.
Yeah.
That's pretty funny.
And they bought that company, that Brazilian, what did they? I'm blanking.
G something.
Orchid. They owned Orchid. Do you remember that? And then at one time, Google people, this is a total discussion, that one of them, it was an actual employee named Orchid, who was very lovely. And I was with the product manager, and they're like, it's big in Brazil. And I was like,
that was the only market.
Big in Brazil. And I was like, congratulations. The US is where you need to be big in. This Facebook thing seems to be kicking your ass. So big in Brazil, but Brazil's a big market. It is.
Yeah, right. We might see some micromobility vehicles coming out of there.
You needed to be big in the US. You needed to be big.
Horace, you were getting to a point, though, that I wanted to talk a little bit more about, which is, so upstarts, electric vehicle upstarts like Rivian, for example, have filed patents for e-bikes. And we've seen a couple other smaller electric vehicle startups. So, I'm kind of using those words casually, like you could be an auto company and ever be small or ever really be a startup. But they are exploring getting into the micromobility space. Do you think Apple, Tesla, some of the other auto OEMs are going to do that? Why or why not? And curious, Horace and Kara, too, what your thoughts are on that.
Just a quick anecdote. So supposedly the reason Elon Musk hasn't gotten into micromobility is because he actually was involved in an accident as a young man or child, I don't know how old he was, while riding a two-wheel vehicle. I don't know if it was a bike or a scooter, but he's had this aversion to the whole thing. This was relayed to me via messaging on some platform. I think it was Twitter. But anyway, there's this. What Kara's pointing out with Orkut as well is just how personal this whole thing is, meaning that people who make the decisions are deciding. This is so true of Apple, particularly because they live in their particular part of the world. They're very, very, self-aware of what their lives are about. And in some ways, this is considered, well, how can you be so provincial? It's a global economy. But the fact is that to make great product decisions, you need to be hyper-focused on where you are and ask those questions of yourself. Famously, Apple made all their decisions without focus groups because they just had a conversation in the cafeteria. Or wherever they were. So you have this Silicon Valley tendency to kind of be very provincial in thinking. And that means they're surrounded by, American, culture and they tend to get to the international late. They get to the non-normative American things late. So that's why, talking to Amazon, for example, they get the productivity benefit and the cost reduction from electrification and micro vehicles for delivery, but that comes from Europe people trying to, communicate to the head office. So it may or may not be heard. So I think that we just have to hope that leadership eventually comes around. They need to be educated. They need to be part of the conversation. And we need to appeal to them as much as possible. And that's always been the case.
Yeah, that's an interesting point. And Kara, what do you think? Apple, Tesla, are they going to...
A little busy, don't you think? I don't think if
he's
he
got
said
lawsuits, he's got
I
multiple
think if
companies.
he's, oh my, he's got 26, he's in the legal business, really.
I'll give you another example.
If he said micromobility to Tesla people, they'd lose their friggin' minds. By the way,
tomorrow there might be an
he
e-bike.
should have, no
Tesla e-bike.
no one's gonna buy it. He should have done this instead of Twitter, like, right? Like,
Absolutely.
it would have been
Fair
a great,
point.
he could have innovated. He gets this stuff.
Here's another anecdote. When they launched the Cybertruck, they actually teased an ATV that could climb into it,
You're
right?
right.
And
I
so
forgot
people
about
were
that.
like, "Oh, when's the Tesla ATV coming?"
They make
And
things
who
up.
knows?
No, let me just say, look at some of the reporting on some of these videos they were sort of cooking up that they put out as real. And, they make things up. But it's fine to dream. It's fine to dream, right? Microsoft had this great video many years ago called Future Forward or something like that, where they showed what a cell phone would be like someday. And it was wonderful, all the things it would do. It was great. It was done by the people at Nokia, I think, or somewhere, wherever, the guy who came from Nokia. It was great. But, this is an area they should have moved. It's an adjacent area that they'd have been good at. And they already had the manufacturing capability and probably make a lot of money. But instead, he'd like to take his money and throw it in the dumpster file of Twitter and just
light it on fire. Yeah.
You sort of are like, why would, but then you think about that with Facebook, the kind of adjacencies he could have done. He certainly can't buy anything because of regulatory issues and scrutiny on purchasing and mergers, especially in the United States and Europe. But you think of all the money he could have spent, $10 billion. You could have.
Here's another funny story. It's Google had its campus, all these bikes around campus. Remember the Google bikes?
Oh, I don't forget them.
Apple has its own bikes around its campus, by the way. I mean, they sort of see things like that, but they're like, we're not going to use them outside the campus.
Well, it's interesting. I have a good story about that because Sergey Brin was the one who thought that up, right? And he got obsessed with it. And he called me once and he's like, I want to put bikes everywhere around the country, just drop hundreds of bikes in cities. And I figured out how many will get stolen. I'm not even going to put anything next to it. I'm just going to drop hundreds of bikes. And then I'm going to keep dropping them because there's a point where people don't steal them anymore. He had this whole thing figured out in his mathematical head, which was fascinating. And I was like, well, cities aren't going to like that with all these wrecked bikes everywhere. Like, you have to have some organization around. And he's like, no, you just do it. And then people will, because of the way it operated on Google Campus, which was his, he pushed that. And these are these multicolored bikes that they would have. On there. And I said, you just can't do it except in a controlled situation where I Google where everybody's behaving. We had a very interesting discussion about it.
You should have called me, man.
And one of the things that I thought was interesting, and he goes, what do you think of the bikes? And I said, I hate to tell you, but every now and then I feel like running them all over because they're so irritating. They look like carnival things. I just want to run through them with my car, with my gasoline powered car, because it was so adorable. They just were too cute at Google all the time. And then I was like, and then I thought, no, I'll steal one, just like you talk about. I'll just put it in the back of my car and head out because they're also beautiful. But it was a great idea at the time. It really was, to get people, exercising and also moving from place to place. But they were always micromobility. Every single one of their headquarters had the latest scooter, the latest, zip board or whatever the heck. And same thing with Facebook. And they had to stop doing them because of legal reasons. They used to run internally. They'd all be on some kind of new souped up skateboard or whatever, constantly. And it was interesting to watch. And then it sort of ended because of liability. But they were definitely there, right? They were completely using them internally. And it reminds you a little bit of, people probably don't know this. Most regular people don't know this, but Slack was a gaming company, and Slack was their internal messaging system they built. And
That's
the gaming
right,
company failed. And then the Slack, and I always felt like at Google, they had all these ideas around food and mobility and stuff, and office, the way offices were, that they just did it themselves and then didn't do anything with it. Like, from an innovative, that was very innovative.
Yeah, well, I'm with Horace here. I wish they had just dropped all those bikes everywhere in the world.
Really?
I think that would have been,
He really wanted to. He was like, on a tear.
And I was in city government. I mean, I was in city government around the same time that the scooters happened, and it was an absolute mess. We got calls every minute.
Yeah, I remember that. I did
people who who were just irate about whatever it was. And,
but it sorted itself out. It eventually sorted itself out.
It eventually sorted itself. We learned new cultural norms.
He was talking 100,000 bikes on New York City, and I thought, I think he'll be in a little trouble.
Can you imagine New Yorkers? They'd be like,
he wasn't going to call anybody either. He was just going to do it. Just one come in at night.
I did all those numbers. I looked at the Chinese, what happened there, and everything. look, you run into all these issues socially, regulatory, liability, and it's absolutely true. But you know what? We've gone through this before. Cell phones were supposed to give us cancer. Cars gave us cancer too, and many other injuries and so on. We make progress by two steps,
using.
sometimes backwards, but I think it's going to happen. It's just we're looking at the very early stage right now with electrification. One way I think about it is like, imagine the size of a battery. You start with something tiny, which is in your ear, like an AirPod, but then you go all the way to a car, and there are thousands of tons of batteries. But there's a gap between the laptop and the car. And if you think about all the opportunities to use batteries, like in containers that are, let's say, the size of a gallon jug, what would you do with that? And the answer is, move a person around short distance. It works really well. And that's going to get filled in. We'll figure out the way to package it. And it's a wonderful time to be alive. I think that we're just discovering so many new ways of doing things. And sometimes bad, sometimes good.
I want to stick on that point for a minute, because we've talked about so many different mobility technologies in this conversation. I mean, we talked about hydrogen powered aircraft, we talked about scooters, we talked about electric cars, and I'm wondering what's missing. So Kara, maybe I'll start with you here. What do you think is missing when we're talking about mobility innovation, when we're talking about mobility tech? What are people not thinking of?
Well, I think they're thinking of everything. Obviously, I think Larry Page has invested in hovering stuff, and maybe when we're long dead, someone will figure that out. That seems cool, but they do think of everything. I think it's really. I find it's a very innovative space. It really is. It's kind of fun to look at it. It's taking old things and making them new, or rethinking them, whether it's skateboards, whether it's bikes, whether it's scooters. Scooters completely came out of nowhere, right? Kind of thing. It felt like that. They'd been around, but it suddenly became really interesting. And they're used extensively here in Washington. And it's not crazy anymore. It doesn't feel jammed. It feels they figured it out just right. That I was just delighted, and it's worked out really well. I still think one would imagine, and there's a lot of experimentation in San Francisco, particularly around autonomy and taxis and delivery vehicles that are autonomous. And I think still a long way away. It's still, just one thing after the next. It's every single car company I talked to, the difficulty level was, I think the problem was Elon oversold it too early, and it's a lofty goal, but to say it completely works without humans, it just doesn't for lots of various and sundry reasons, whether it's light or it's weather or it's people or it's this. I mean,
I was going to say humans around them.
Like this one story in the Times this week, a cop car with the lights is a problem compared to a regular car. It looks like a tree apparently. I'm not an expert, like a problem. But, whether it's light, he was anti-lidar or radar, and then everyone's like, oh no, you kind of need that. So I think everyone was arguing about specifics very early when it wasn't unproven. I found that irritating. Like they knew what was going to happen. And so, and they, what I always say, they're often frequently wrong, but never in doubt. And so they say it's certainly no humans. I'm like, certainly? Like how, like you don't know that. And so I think I've been disappointed by that. And I wish there was more, it's just, I wish people's expectations got up. Right. And then the reality, and it's not just reporters reporting on, one crash happens versus 14,000. Everyone's very clear that that autonomy is the goal, really, because it's a bloodbath in car crashes. It is. It just is. It's just, and we don't think about it because we've now gotten used to it. We're used to car crashes. We're used to plane crashes. Well, plane crashes don't crash that much anymore. Although there have been
thankfully not.
There've been a couple recently, but they're remarkable because it happens. And so, and it's tragic every time it does. But I think people have taken that risk and said, fine, I'm going to get on a plane because the convenience and the efficacy is much better. And I think that, autonomy is something I'd love to see more innovation in, like getting there and having the government figure it out. I just think there's so much on people's plate. Electric will be the thing that should be focused on initially and really perfected, and then economy will come next. But that's where I would love to see even more innovation, and innovation that has humility, versus innovation that is just braggy, which is irritating because it ruins it it creates expectations that they never meet. And then I think it's harder for people to get into it. And then eventually people will accept a certain level of problem. But what are they called? Something utilitarians, whatever. Do you think, there's an acceptable number of deaths, but they're correct in that it's a bloodbath with car crashes. We shouldn't have those. That's kind of an unnecessary thing.
Yeah, no, entirely unnecessary rather. And certainly across the past 2 years, we've seen double-digit percentage increases or percentage point increases.
But we're used to it. We've accepted it in our reptilian brain. We've accepted car crashes. But we have.
No, not good, not good. But Horace, I'm going to pose the same question to you, but with a slightly different flavor, which is, if you were an entrepreneur today, what kind of mobility company would you start?
Well, that's very tough because I got to play favorites. I like to say, I love all 1,500 companies that are a part of our community. But my background is, again, seeing patterns over time, and we've seen the pattern of computing, then mobile computing, and then we're now probably on the cusp of wearable computing. And it kind of follows the same pattern, which is like people start to figure out how to put things together. Sometimes you integrate as you do so. So Apple's still integrated in silicon, for example, and now it's supposedly getting into batteries and getting into screens.
Batteries.
And so there's that sort of integration process. The other process is exact opposite. It was just like breaking things up, and that we call unbundling. And so unbundling the newspaper was the internet. The unbundling the record was the iTunes. So someone clever once said, you either make money integrating or unbundling, bundling or unbundling. So I have to ask always, like, where are we with the particular industry? And I think in the industry right now, we're still at the phase of trying to figure out how to put things together that are useful as services for people in mobility, either short distances or long distances. Kara points out, that she didn't quite call it this, but it's like the word is mobility as a service. It's like, why don't I just pay a monthly and I can get anywhere from anywhere? That makes a lot of sense. And I think people would love to have a subscription model
and with AI, it should be easy to figure out.
Absolutely. It should stitch it all together, because right now there's friction in hopping from one mode to the other. You got to pay parking, then you got to get on the bus. Nobody does that. So it's got to be done. Like I open my phone and if, for example, let's say Google does it. I say I want to go somewhere, and it says, as a great assistant would say, I'll get you there. Would you like to go minimum cost or minimum time? And then maybe give you a bunch of options like a search engine. And you pick that. And then it says someone will come at the door in 5 minutes or 2 minutes. And and then they take you. And if it's traffic, they say, okay, here, sir, madam, hop off here. There's a scooter waiting for you. Complete the journey on this vehicle, and it'll be like your map.
Yes, I call it actionable and friction. I was going to mention frictionlessness, and there is no Steve Jobs of this area, right? One had hoped Elon was this, but he's not. He's, I always joke, I knew Steve Jobs. He wasn't my friend. I knew Steve Jobs. I covered Steve Jobs, and he's no Steve Jobs, right? Because there's got to be something that I think what Steve Jobs absolutely did, which was critical, which people I think discount, is he made people understand how it all works together in a frictionless manner, and that was everything to him. Like a consumer was the consumer experience was the top of his thing. And most technologists like Elon are like, well, whatever, it'll work because we are smart. We know how to use it. And I think there's nobody that does that. This idea of what you're talking about is it's called actionable. And you think that with like the Fitbit, the Apple Watch is the closest that's come to it. Apple is always at the closest it comes to it. But like, if they tell you your steps, what does that mean? What does it mean with your heartbeat? What do I do?
Why do you care?
No, but it's better than this. When I eat a donut, it should tell me, hey, you shouldn't have eaten that. And here's why. And by the way, now you need to go for a mile walk to discount that. And by the way, your blood sugar's here. Like it should be able to tell you and assist you, just like you were talking with mobility. You should be able to drive until you can't drive. And then it'll drive you to a scooter or to public transportation. And then you pay it should be frictionless. And that's who's going to win here, is the good person and that's, to me, is Apple. Ultimately, I mean, I can't think of another company that could do it, but that's a really interesting challenge for them. I think that's why I think they're doing those glasses, because the glasses are going to be part of that. eventually.
Interesting. Yeah. And
I,
Kara,
no argument, man. This is the most agreement I can have. Yeah, absolutely.
There's nobody capable. There's no Steve Jobs of this yet, but maybe Apple writ large or some other companies that help them with it. But frictionlessness should be at the top of mind of all micromobility, of where you're going, including with cars, with the whole, all of them working together.
Yeah.
It's all transportation.
And I couldn't agree more with that. And Kara, I know we just have you maybe for one more minute. And so I want to thank you so much for being part of this conference, for having this conversation, for sharing so many amazing thoughts, and for really being our oracle of micromobility tech too. We started out this conversation by talking about why you gave up your car, why you had to get an electric vehicle. Last question for you is, what would it take for you to give up your electric vehicle and go all public transit, walking, cycling, scooting again?
I'm not giving up car. I never thought cars were going away. I just, I wanted, I think ownership of cars. I don't want to own a car. I hate owning a car. And I wish there was a better system like you're talking about, where it takes me to places where it can take me to another car. It could take me to wherever. It could take me to a train. And that would be ideal. I try my best to do that all the time. My car sits in the park in the thing quite a lot. You know what I mean? So what is that frictionless system? It's not there yet, but it certainly is. You can see it possible if they interoperate. It's sort of like when you had, Betamax and Sony, and the VHS, like then it wasn't, and then it was easy, and then of course something else superseded it. So I think that's where you have to get to, is this idea of Silicon Valley talks about frictionless all the time, but to do it is making complex things simple. Is people often make simple things complex more than anything else. And so that was the genius of Steve Jobs, making complex things simple. And intuitive. And I think you can do it here. You could see it happening. It just will take a lot of AI, et cetera. So anyway.
Well, that feels like life advice too. And I'm here for it. So Kara, thank you again. Horace, thank you again. This has been a fantastic conversation. And so wonderful to be here with you today.
All right. Thank you. Thanks, Horace.
Thanks.
Bye,
Thanks
Julie.
so much. Bye-bye.
Bye.